Welcome to Menopause Rescue. I'm Dr. Polly Watson. Midlife women are often caught up in a sea of symptoms. Too often, they're overwhelmed by the lack of support from mainstream healthcare. They're inundated with so-called experts who are selling solutions which may lack credibility. I'm a Menopause Society certified gynecologist with both traditional and functional medicine training. I'm here to guide you through this transition and help you decipher the facts from the fads. Armed with credible information, I hope you are empowered to rescue and restore your health, making the second half of your life your best. Today's episode is going to focus on just getting started. Oftentimes, midlife is a wake-up call for our health, and it can feel so overwhelming to even know how to begin. So our theme today is really talking about making small positive change, letting perfection go, and focusing on incremental progress. So I hope this episode is helpful for you in just taking that first step, however small it needs to be to get started. I had a great visit from a friend from college this last weekend. And before we dive into today's podcast, I just want to give a shout out for making time for old friends. There is always an excuse. You always have something to do for your job or your family or whatever, or it's too expensive or it's too far to drive and you've got to get on an airplane and whatever. Just do it. I feel like menopause is our second adolescence. In the first adolescence, we're learning who we are separate from our parents. And in this midlife transition, I feel like we're redefining who we are separate from our families. Not that we don't love our families, but as our relationships with our kids change, if you're a parent, we often are going to redefine ourselves. Sometimes our relationships with our spouses are changing. So it's really cool to hang out with folks who knew you before you were a professional or before you were a partner or before you were a parent. And you're able to kind of see those parts of yourself, your younger self, and see what still fits. And I think that's just so refreshing. After this weekend with my friend, I feel like a plant that got watered. It was just so fantastic to have real conversations with people who knew me really well and that you could say anything to. So if you have friends from your youth you miss, please make time for yourself and them. It's a gift you both deserve. Okay, so now that was my commercial for making time for friends is over. I will get down to the podcast this week. My friend, like a lot of you, works really hard at her job and is successful and responsible for a large team. She also has really successful kids that she has supported in their many activities, which take them all over the state and all over the country. So her health has really taken a back seat to her parenting responsibilities and her work responsibilities. And so now, like many of us at midlife, her health is really sick of being neglected and is starting to show up in ways that really can't get ignored anymore. So our time together got me thinking on how people successfully make behavior change. And one of the things that impressed me so much about my friend was her positioning this moment of creating change from a place of giving herself grace. She was doing such a great job about focusing on really small, manageable changes that really fit with her extremely busy and demanding career and parenting life. The other thing that impressed me was her ability to focus on moving forward rather than getting stuck in the quagmire of why she hadn't been making positive health changes up to this point. So I work with women all day long, and a lot of us don't talk very nicely to ourselves. And I feel like we waste so much time and energy getting stuck in a place of judgment and condemnation. Trying to make behavior change is hard enough. It is impossible to make positive change when you're starting from a place of judgment. So I hope we can approach this conversation about making healthier changes with love and appreciation for the present moment and all of the hard work we've done to get us to this moment. We can't undo the past. No one is perfect, no matter what their Instagram filter looks like. Many of us are just doing the best we can. We can only focus on small things we can do right now to move us towards a healthier tomorrow. A lot of women I work with are very successful professionally, and they've put their careers over their health for their whole life. And usually, midlife is this moment of awakening when not paying attention to our health really catches up with us. So maybe when we were in our 20s or 30s, we could get away with pulling an all-nighter once a week or every 2 weeks to meet a work deadline. And seemingly we could bounce back, or we could survive on caffeine to jitter our way through the day and then use wine to calm down at night. And then once we hit our 40s and our 50s, our tolerance for stressing our body so hard just evaporates. Those band-aids we were using of excess caffeine and alcohol and adrenaline just start to fall off. So here we are at midlife, and all of a sudden we just realize we're crabby and tired and just done. And what often gets people's attention is a new health diagnosis. Folks will kind of keep treading water, feeling like crap for a while because the transition has happened relatively gradually and they don't really realize how cruddy they feel. And then maybe they go to their primary care and they haven't gone in a while and their blood pressure is up, or they get blood work and their cholesterol is high, or they get on a scale and they don't normally weigh themselves and they've gained 15 pounds. Maybe they're noticing things that are more clinical, that they're just struggling with word finding or word choice, and that's starting to affect their professional lives. Whatever the wake up call is, it's so overwhelming to get started. It can feel like there's so many things that need to change. It feels impossible to know where to begin. So today we're going to talk about very basic foundations for health. And my goal is to help you figure out what is the smallest bite of the elephant you can start with. Culturally, we're living in this moment of extremes and polarization. I feel like there are a lot of folks that are promoting their version of how to create health. And oftentimes that means denouncing another person's version. Consumers are overwhelmed with seemingly contradictory health information, and it can get really confusing about knowing who to trust and who to follow. Should you be paleo or should you be vegan? Should you do fasting? Should you be eating a ton of protein? It's overwhelming. So I want to encourage you that you are the expert in you. You know your history. You know what's worked for you in the past. You know what's not worked for you. I would encourage you to listen to yourself and what resonates. We can be so paralyzed by trying to make the perfect choice and the perfect plan that we fail to make any progress. There is no one right way to do any of this. There is your right way. So let's all just take a giant deep breath and let perfect go. Our goal is to make small progress that's sustainable. Each small step is a stepping stone to build on larger progress. And we're not going to get anywhere if we don't take that first step. So one of the tools we use in our practice is a goal setting target. And I'm going to walk you through this as an exercise to map out for yourself where you are and help you clarify where you could start first. You could draw it on paper. I'm also going to include it in the show notes. You can imagine a bullseye with a green center surrounded by a yellow ring and then a red ring. And there's a cross through the center of the bullseye, dividing the bullseye into 4 parts. So each quadrant of that bullseye will have a different focus for behavior change. One quadrant could be nutrition, one could be movement, one quadrant could be sleep, one quadrant could be stress management. We could probably come up with a lot more things to put on this target, but we're going to start with those 4 basics. If you've got other things that you want to put in there, maybe you want to put community in there, maybe you want to put spirituality in there. Cool. Float your own boat. It's your target. You can write it however you want. I want you to look at each quadrant and rate yourself on how you're feeling like you're doing in each of those 4 categories. So the center and the green is represented as the ideal. The yellow area is kind of the middle ground, and the red perimeter is kind of your danger zone where your health is really suffering. I'll give you some parameters in the addendum to this episode, but I really want you to fill this out for yourself first before you receive outside input. So, yes, I'm a doctor and I have a sense of what I think ideal looks like, but your ideal may look different than a generic midlife ideal. And I don't think we hold enough space for this in our conversations. Maybe you have an injury you're recovering from, or maybe you're caring for an elderly parent, or maybe you have a child with a chronic illness. Everybody's health goals don't have to look the same. We're all on this journey to get better, and your version of good could look really different than my version of good. As long as we're both moving towards our version of better, that's all that you need. I want to pause for a moment and talk about a potential elephant in the room. So, I work with a lot of successful women. Some of them told me that they went to school and work really hard so they can get out of the kitchen and get away from traditional domestic chores. So when we're in the clinic and we're talking about health changes and eating real food that inevitably you're going to have to cook at home, there's often this immediate pushback because embracing the domesticity of cooking feels in conflict with how some of these women identify. Again, there's no right or wrong way to be a professional woman. And I totally hear where these women are coming from, although this isn't my relationship with cooking. So, I went to medical school. I'm a doctor. I'm a professional person. I've also been cooking since I was 4. So my grandmother taught me how to cook, and we did so many things wrong by today's standards, but man, we had a great time. She had me making apple pies for my granddaddy, who was a diabetic, and we thought it was okay to serve apple pie to a diabetic if it was made with sweet and low instead of sugar. So, this was in the 70s, y'all. Okay, so give me a break. But I can see myself, standing on a kitchen chair and my mother's old Alice in Wonderland apron. The entire kitchen was covered with flour. And watching my grandmother cook was like watching alchemy. She was magic. However, I saw her wasn't this place of subservience or anything negative. She brought people together with her food. She could take a block of cheese and a dozen eggs and an otherwise seemingly empty refrigerator, and she would make cheese souffle, which felt like this elegant, puffy gift. So I kind of grew up with this idea of cooking as a way to bring people together, to make connection in a way that feels like a gift and not a burden. But I realize that I not necessarily have a large company of people who feel like this, and that's okay. So most of my patients don't have this story. They don't like cooking. They don't like the idea of meal planning. They don't like meal prep. So if one of your obstacles to healthier eating is just really hating cooking, let's lean into that rather than trying to change how you think about cooking. Some of my professional patients have gotten really creative. One of them got on care.org and she hires someone who shops and meal preps for her. She even has this person come up with a weekly menu. She approves the menu, and then she comes home to pre-made meals. I realize that not everybody can afford that. I'm personally a huge fan for recruiting your teenage kids to be responsible for a meal a week. They will learn to make food, they will actually eat, and they will also develop skills they need to launch into the world. There are also a lot of healthy meal delivery services. So I am not talking about things like Blue Apron, where they send you the ingredients in a ton of packaging and you still have to cook and clean the dishes. I am not talking about that. I'm talking about things like Territory Foods or Paleo on the Go, where you get a meal that you heat up, and hopefully you're not heating it up in plastic, and hopefully it's organic, and hopefully it's from reasonably sourced proteins. But there are a lot of resources out there. So if you don't like cooking, that's fine. I would not pick an area with so much friction. I would pick an area to get started that felt a little bit easier. We have some easy food resources in our practice that you can get access to through these show notes. All of our resources may not be in your area, but I'd encourage you to take a look at those. Behavior change is hard enough. If you don't love being in the kitchen, cool, go to the gym, do something else, and you can outsource this, I think, fairly easily, or get your kids to help out, which I think is fantastic, to help them develop skills they're going to use for the rest of their lives, and also take something off your plate. I also want to talk a little bit about stress management as an area for health change, because I don't feel like it gets enough attention. So when I bring up stress management in the clinic, some of my patients say, well, I'm not stressed. And they don't get why I feel like they need to be working on this every day. So stress management isn't something we do only when we're feeling uptight. Stress management is one other part of how we care for our bodies and our minds, so that hopefully when life throws us a curveball, we have some tools and are more resilient to handle that change. I also think this is another area where, if, for instance, you have a lot of friction and you hate meditation, awesome. You don't have to meditate. There are so many other things you can do. Don't keep pushing yourself in an area that has a ton of friction. Find a different path. So if you hate meditation, maybe you could try tapping or emotional freedom technique. Maybe you start doing Tai Chi videos on YouTube. Maybe you try visualization on an app on your phone. Maybe you're doing some somatic yoga, right? I think that's a theme here. Anytime you're hitting a lot of friction, try to think about if there's another way to move your health boat forward. You can take a different path. Don't keep pushing yourself up against the thing that you hate to do. There are a lot of ways to do this. There is not one perfect solution. Ideally, we're all trying to do 10 or 20 minutes of some sort of nervous system recovery a day, but maybe you start with 3 minutes. Maybe you start by learning how to do some breathing exercises. Maybe you take deep breaths every time you sit at a stoplight. You can start microscopically small. If you hate meditation and Tai Chi sounds too woo to you, cool. Do you have a pet? Pets can be fantastic for nervous system recovery. Pets don't judge us. They love us unconditionally, and that is just so fantastic. So, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I am never going to meditate, and I don't know what tapping is, and I'm never going to do Tai Chi, but you've got a dog, great. Go snuggle with your dog. Feel how their fur feels. Look in their beautiful eyes. Watch how you can make them smile. That's another nervous system reset that you and your pet are going to feel better. Another thing I'd like to interject about stress management is creating time and space for nervous system recovery has a lot to do with setting boundaries. So we have to set boundaries at home and at work. And I think it's getting harder and harder as people sort of have this Netflix attention span where they expect whatever they want on demand immediately. And that's not healthy. You don't need to respond to emails immediately. You don't need to answer your phone all the time. You don't need to look at social media all the time. You need some time where you can go dark and that time is protected. When I'm working with patients and we're talking about starting behavior change and we're trying to think about where to begin, and we kind of identify these areas: sleep, movement, stress management, nutrition, people get overwhelmed so quickly and they think, I can't do it all. And that's okay. You don't have to do it all at once. We're just going to start small. But when that feeling of overwhelm starts coming in, oftentimes it's really helpful to take inventory and identify if there's something that you can take off your plate. Is there something extra in your life that you really don't have to do? Do you really need to be spending time on social media? Do you really need to be on some committee? A lot of us end up here in this kind of midlife strung out state because we're a little type A, because we're a little perfectionistic. And so it's super hard to delegate because nobody's going to do it as well as we will, right? Like I've been there. I know you because I am you too, right? So learning how to say no to some things and also learning how to delegate and letting things not be perfect. Can it just be good enough? Good enough can get things done pretty well. Good enough can also be really helpful for you to claim back some time and energy so that you can take care of yourself. So someone else may not do the job just like you would, or they may not do it to the level that you would, but it might be good enough, or it might have to be, because doing it all by yourself and not taking time for your health is costing you. And while you're sort of taking this inventory of what possibly you can take off your plate, it's also a great time to reflect on really what are your values, right? And so for me, my yard may not be perfectly maintained because we're not going to spray chemicals in the yard and I can't get out there every single weekend to pull weeds. But it's really important for me to get to exercise class or lift or do whatever I'm going to do and make real food for my family. So I'm going to let my front yard go. And there are going to be times when it looks fantastic, and there are going to be times that it looks kind of cruddy. And that's okay. I value that a lot less than I value the time that I need to take care of my body and my family's nutrition. Doing it all is an absolute fairy tale. We got to let something go, and that's okay. So as you've gotten this target filled out for yourself, hopefully you've kind of filled out whatever the 4 areas you wanted to work for. Like I say, I picked sleep, movement, nutrition, stress management. Maybe you picked different things. Maybe you have more than 4 quadrants on your target. Now that you fill this out, where should you start? And I would encourage you to start small so you can get a relatively easy win and get some momentum. So you may be tempted to pick the area where you're furthest away from your ideal. And I'm going to offer that maybe you shouldn't pick the hardest thing. I want you to think about what is the easiest thing you can do first. We want you to start with success and not a failure. So if you pick an area that you've consistently struggled with your whole life, there may be a reason there that that's a struggle, and it may make sense to get some traction on another area, get you feeling a little bit better, and then you have the fortitude to come back around to that harder area. When you identify that one thing you want to work on first, be clear on specifically what success looks like for you in that area. How are you going to track and measure success? Can you get really granular about the time and place you're going to work on this goal? Are you going to give yourself a reward if you make it? Or are you going to pair the task with something that you enjoy to make it easier. Like if you want to go for more walks, are you going to listen to the podcast you really like only on those walks so that the lure of the podcast will get you putting your sneakers on? Do you need to ask for some help? Maybe there's an accountability person in your life that can partner with you. So menopause is when a lot of times our health feels like it's in crisis and there's not a magic hormone that's going to fix everything. Yes, I love hormones. I take hormones, but we have to do all of the things and it can get really overwhelming because there are a lot of things. Fine. We're going to start with one thing. And so I hope this episode has helped you with a little tool. You can draw your own health goal target. You can use mine. I really want you to make what ideal looks like for you and honor that versus just taking what mine looks like. But I hope that this time together has helped you break down behavior change and allowed you to clearly identify one small area where you can start making improvements and moving forward. Thanks for listening to Menopause Rescue. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and it helps you create some time and space to make this the best half of your life. If you've enjoyed this content, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. This helps other listeners find this resource and rescue and restore their health. If you enjoyed this topic and want to learn more, check out our resource guide for this episode. If today's podcast resonated with you and you want to take a deeper dive, check out my educational resources. We offer basic membership, which is an archive of over 100 videos on menopausal topics ranging from bone health to libido. We add to this archive every month, so the resource becomes richer and richer over time. If you're looking for a menopause expert and live in North Carolina, take our free online class and see if we're a match for your needs. It's called Are We a Good Fit? And is a quick and easy way to learn more about our practice and what it has to offer. Hey, this is Dr. Watson. This is just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed, and any information you get from this podcast is considered educational only. You should make medical decisions with your healthcare provider. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition, and they should seek assistance from their healthcare professionals.